So now we come to the interview section, and this month our very own Pete Allison will be chairing a Q&A debate about local procurement, driving local economy and social value. Pete is joined by Sarah Lambshead of Faithful and Gould and Mike Cameron Davies of Business Transformation. So over to you, Pete, Sarah and Mike for the next half hour or so. And I will be privately sending alerts to Pete with 10 and 5 minutes to go. Take it away, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to let Sarah and Mike introduce themselves in a second. They'll do that far better than I will. But local procurement, this hopefully isn't going to be anything like as dry as sometimes that word procurement makes it sound. It's a really interesting subject area and one we're beginning to look at a lot. To cut a long story short, if we turn around to any business, whether it's a micro SME or whether it's the largest business in the country or whether it's a local authority, and you say, what percentage of your procurement do you deploy within a 30-mile range of deployment? How much procurement do you get within a 30-mile range of deployment? It's an extremely rare occasion when they will be able to give you an answer. Not necessarily a lack of willingness to get the answer, but it's not something that sits normally in their remit. If you follow that back up with saying, what do you aspire that number to be in an ideal world, then on the basis they haven't been able to give you the number in the first place, they're not going to have a catch chance in hell of having that second answer. And of course, the logical thing that you never get to is, okay, so how do you move it from A to B? And why would you want to move it to A to B? There's a thing called the Social Value Act, which I'm quite confident we'll touch on during the next half hour, which was brought in 2012, but applies in statute law to local authorities, not to private industry. Social value, we're used to the word social in the three letters ESG, environmental, social and governance. What does social mean? If we increase deployment into the local economy, the impact of that in terms of skills, in terms of employment, in terms of community, and on, would potentially be huge. So if we can grow that proportion as businesses that is deployed locally, especially when you're talking about some very significant businesses, then there's a real win for everyone in that local community, not just in business, but specifically in the business community and small businesses and many other things. So that kind of gives a very brief overview to where we're going with this. So we're not going to be getting into how do I fill out my procurement bid? That's a different story for a different day if it affects you. That's not where we're going here. I think the best thing first, and before we say anything, I just want to put a special thank you into Sarah Lambshead. Those of you who have been following and booking in on the basis of all the marketing we put out will notice that I'm talking about Sarah, not Adam Vines. Adam Vines nailed me last night and said, oh, I've just realised I've got to fly to Singapore now for a client meeting. She said, I'm not sure what I can say other than I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get at the meeting. So there's not much I can do at that point other than say, Adam, have a good flight. There's not much you can do about that. Sarah and I met in March when we were working on another project for South Gloucestershire. Sarah has a real passion for this space, and I'm not going to steal any of her thunder for that. So I think having done all that, let's let Mike introduce himself first and then we'll come to Sarah. Mike, I haven't said anything about you. I've been flattering Sarah and ignoring you, but I know you too well. You've just hit me afterwards. That's fine. Mike, would you like to just introduce yourself for the benefit of this discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. And nothing wrong with flattering Sarah. So really briefly, I'm an engineer by profession. I spent the last 35 years delivering very large change programs in some of the biggest corporates. I now run my own sector agnostic business consultancy where I specialise in helping mostly local companies develop and deliver their business strategies and assist them with operational opportunities and challenges. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Thanks, Squire. And Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself so much better than I would have done?
Yes, and thank you very much. The build-up is almost too much. So I'm Sarah Lambshead, and I've spent most of my career working in the built environment in roles that started when we used to call things like social value, community engagement, through to business development, transformational change, and now social value. So I now work for Faithful and Gould, who are part of Atkins. So we're a multidisciplinary global consultancy that cover a lot of different built environment sectors. And my job is to help them implement social value well internally, and also to be able to help others be able to implement social value in a consultancy capacity.
Thank you. So thank you both. Now, today we're talking about local economies and what a difference it would make if we were able to grow the percentage of overall buying and procurement that was made locally to where goods and services are then deployed. Can I ask, I'm going to ask you both, a lot of these questions are going to come to both of you, but just to set the scene, how did you come to be involved in this initiative, and why do you see it worth investing in? And let's go to Sarah first with that question.
Okay, thank you. So I think the key thing to get out of this session, if you're not familiar with the social value movement, is how incredibly opportunistic it is for everybody involved. It's a really good example of you know, the circular economy, because if you want to be able to implement social value into your business, you will be able to win more business because the other businesses are also looking to implement social value. And one of the biggest social value criteria is local employment and investment and procurement. So therefore, when you were saying that you don't know how many businesses would be able to say, or local authorities would be able to say what the percentage was that, you know, they procure in the local area, I would say that every single tier 1 contractor who's been measuring this kind of data for the last 5 to 10 years would be able to tell you, probably within a 5-mile radius, the percentage of their supply chain that comes from the local area. So it's really about what you measure. And that's what social value is about. The social value movement was created to change the way the world accounts for value.
Brilliant.
So we can touch on that more.
Yeah, as we work through, and we know, and because of some of the dialogue, you know, I'm not from a procurement background, and you come to these things very simplistically, and you ask that question. I made a bit of a joke earlier. They can't answer it. I agree with you. Actually, they can answer it, but of course, it's commercially sensitive information. So there is a little bit of a journey that we've had to walk about getting the trust of people, and actually then they what happens then is they quietly come back on a side email or not in a group chat saying, okay, this is what it is, but please don't tell anybody. And I understand that. Mike, do you want to give us the same answer, not the same answer, would you give us an answer to the same question?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a very personal thing to me. I grew up in a small town and kind of saw a different side of community. I lived next door to a pub that my dad used to frequent quite a lot, and there was a real thing there about the guys all mucking together and kind of helping each other out. And just to give a couple of examples, you know, one of the guys was a builder, so, and everyone had their own veggie plot, so they borrowed his van, they take in turns to borrow his van, go to the local farm, pick up the horse or cow manure and bring it back and deliver it to each other's houses, and we'd all do it together. And I think what I learned from that, and the various other things that all the guys did helping each other out, because they all had, you know, expertise and skills and that kind of stuff, was that kind of thing about community, and how that's a very local thing. And when you work with people in the community, it builds the community even more. And I guess if I flip to the other side of it, in my corporate life, I was not involved in the decision making, but was often party to the outcome of some what I believe to be horrendous decisions, and I think recent history proves it actually, where companies were chasing the lowest labour dollar by moving all around. You know, I've seen companies going from, you know, from Spain to Eastern Europe to Russia to China to India to South America. And I've seen companies setting up units all over the world chasing the lowest cost labour, and it takes them 3, 4, 5 years to do it, 3, 4, 5 years to get some benefit of it, and then immediately after that they're moving on to the next place. And you know, I talk about recent history kind of defining that. If you look at how far we've gone away from localization, you know, we have an energy crisis right now and various other crises because we're not producing things locally anymore. And I you know, so I very much see that as kind of full circle of why localization is important. So I'm not saying globalization isn't important as well, because it is, but I think there's a real important balance that's been lost about using localization because it's good for your business in the long term, and also, you know, just from a pure economics perspective, but also the community that it can help build.
Thanks, Mike. We're used to a scenario where there are a couple of driving factors that are issues in this local procurement thing. The first agenda that we see is businesses that are driving, as you said there, to the very bottom dollar price. And you know, we could spend forever explaining unnecessarily what problems that creates in terms of quality and delivery and globalization. And sometimes we know that it's delivered because this organization can deliver it with red knobs, not blue knobs, but actually the organization could do it with blue knobs, could do so much better a job, but the specification is written a certain way. So the one issue is about driving price and profitability, which comes with a capitalist society that we live in and with private sector. The second thing that of course we're all familiar with is protecting the situation by writing complicated documents which cover the back of the person who's buying and just create a living nightmare of work for the person who's trying to fulfill. So my question here then is, do you think that larger businesses, with the businesses that have a procurement process or department, do they understand themselves in true terms the value of buying that they put into local economies and where those goods and services are delivered being local to where they're procured? Do you think they do that? Mike, do you want to kick us back with that one, and then we'll come to Sarah?
Yeah, sure. And I think Sarah mentioned rightly in the last answer this thing about metrics driving behaviours, and that's absolutely crucial, because if the only thing that you're looking at is price, then all you're going to do is chase price and miss all the other important elements such as risk and longevity and all that kind of stuff. So I think it'd be wrong to say that they don't understand the value. It's whether or not that's then translated into, you know, the business processes. You know, I've worked with a lot of large corporates, and I've seen very often a metric for a procurement department about being reducing the number of suppliers to, you know, a certain number. And the only way you kind of achieve, well, not the only way, but one of the easy ways to achieve that is by consolidation. And all you end up with is a middle person who's transacting on behalf of everyone else. So those kind of metrics, I think, aren't necessarily understood all the way through the organisation and the detail of the behaviours that drives. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of organisations.
Yeah, brilliant. Sarah, what's your take on that understanding that businesses have?
I think you can place quite a lot of faith in the push factor that the Social Value Act has, because actually what you've now got is two pieces of legislation. I'll put them in the chat later. They're not very imaginatively named, but I do recommend you look at them. You've got PPN 0620, which is, like you said, for central government procurement of services and products. And that is aimed at things that are over 10 million. But actually what has happened is that local authorities have seen what central government have done, and they've taken what that legislation means and they've implemented it in their own way. So that is now a mandatory requirement for social value to be part of a bid and tender. It is set at 10%, but for example, Bristol City Council decided that they would put theirs in at 20%. So that means that these corporates are now under a lot of pressure to demonstrate both quantitative and qualitative how they are having an impact on social value. And a big part of social value is about the local economy and how you are creating jobs, experiences, skills, and using local suppliers within your supply chain. What you've then got, which is probably the key one for most of the people on this call, is PPN 0521, and that is legislation that refers to the national priority outcomes that must be considered alongside any additional local priorities. And that is legislation that also is then telling people who are procuring that they have to focus on creating new businesses, new jobs and new skills tackling climate change and reducing waste, and improving supplier diversity, innovation and resilience. So that is legislation that is steering people to have a local agenda when it comes to their supply chain, and to use SMEs and not bypass them in favour of the larger corporations. It then incentivises the corporations to have to incorporate SMEs into their supply chain to be able to demonstrate the social value that they're being asked to demonstrate. So it is quite a virtuous circle once you get your head round where it all fits in, and it's self-propelling. You know, each bit feeds into the next bit.
But just for clarity at the moment,
yeah.
Although the influence will be there, the statutory and the mandatory requirements are purely on local governmental bodies, aren't they? So the game that's in play here is about setting up a best practice example, which
that's right. And the incentive for the private sector is that if you get it, if you don't get it right with the public sector, you're not going to win work with them. And a lot of companies, you know, like the one I work for, rely on both private sector and public sector work. And so you may as well then develop those processes and implement them into the private sector as well.
And we know a number of private organisations who really are buying into that best practice and seeing taken away. But we also know some who aren't at this point, and that's where the dialogue comes.
You know what? I've got an interesting framing for that, which is that we measure value as economic value, environmental value, and social value. So economic value, we all understand. That's measuring changes in money, market transactions. It's captured through costs and prices. Environmental value is changes on natural resources. So we understand that as things like carbon capture, offsetting. And social value is the changes we create in people's lives. Now, the reason why economic value is so well understood, and excuse the pun, is, you know, the most used currency, is because it's been around and working as a system for 600 years. The environmental value, we've been capturing that for 40 years. And the social value, 20 at most. So we're at a tipping point, and we will be moving exponentially faster.
And
we're into new territory.
It's the journey we're on. It's the journey we're on, and that's what's so fascinating about this whole dialogue. So just to kind of put this all in context, because we've been talking there a lot about the motivations and the understandings of why this would happen, but from both of your perspectives, when you actually achieve a better percentage, a higher level that goes into the local community, what is it? What is it tangibly that you see that goes into that local community, extending a whole thriving ecosystem and increased local tax and all this kind of game? What do you see the benefits and the priorities? Sarah, do you want to pick up with that one again, since you're in the flow?
Sure, yeah. So I think what's important to understand from a social value point of view is that there's three elements to social value. So to give an example, the social value in a contract would be, if you, let's say the example is to build and maintain a hospital, you'd have the inherent social value, which is all the things you can capture and measure around how you change the lives of the people who are going to use the hospital. So from the way you design it to the way it's going to be managed, for all the extra things that might be in place that make it a better experience for the people who come into the hospital, that can all be measured. And you can measure you know, how much better things can work in a hospital if you've got local suppliers, for example. So you might be able to have fresher food if your catering was being bought from local suppliers. You'd have far fewer issues of maintenance and things like that if you were using people from the local community than someone who's organising, you know, facilities management from a different country. Then you've got embedded social value, which is changing the lives of the people who work on the contract through employment, apprenticeships, training and volunteering. So that's all the people who are involved in building that hospital and then maintaining the hospital. So again, you know, it's really obvious and common sense that the more people you have who are local to that area, the more working on that project means to them, the more they're able to give, and, you know, the general feeling of, you know, like Mike was referring to, of a community coming together and working on something for themselves, is generated, and then you've got the additional social value from a project. So that's 3 different elements, and the additional is how you change the lives of the people in the local community that project is sitting in. So therefore, from the local supply chain point of view, if you're employing people locally from your supply chain, they are then much more likely to bring in all the extra local people in their supply chain. So you've got the opportunity to have far more apprenticeships. You've got the opportunity to reach out for, harder to reach groups who wouldn't be employed in that hospital otherwise, or you've got, the opportunity to reach out to younger people and involve them in the project, things like that.
Brilliant. Mike, I know you'll come from combinations of the same perspective of that, and I know different ones because obviously you're coming from a different set of communities. So what's your take on the real impact that we're looking to achieve in those communities?
Yeah, so my feedback on that really is based around the feedback I get from my clients, I think. So if fundamentally people do business with people, and if the people you're doing business with are local, you can talk to them frequently and you can get to know a lot more about them, and you have things in common rather than someone you see once in a blue moon who maybe have a completely different culture, background, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's really important and should never be underestimated. The phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know, and the more people you get to know within a local community, the more that kind of spreads. So buying locally really means, as Sarah said, companies are investing in the friends and families and the people that they socialize and network with as well. And that gives, I think very topically, the challenges of retention in the workplace. That brings a new dynamic to that. And that's never more significant than now. So there's the way that the money rolls back into the community as well. So the government has a levelling up strategy right now. What better way for a business to do this and effectively reinvest some of its money into its own community by employing more people in the local community, either directly or indirectly through supplier partners. And that almost then becomes a microcosm for meritocracy, because of course as a business does well, so does the local community, which therefore drives even more incentive for that community to support that business on whatever level. So, I think there's a whole thing there about pulling everything together, and it takes on, I think, many of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment, where people talk about, various splits in the country and different communities and that kind of stuff. There's a core here that businesses can lead with that can change that whole dynamic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the whole reason for doing this obviously is about community and actually benefiting community, whether that's the business community, whether it's the wider community and society in general. That creates itself an interesting thing about overlaying ESG and ESG policy over procurement and procurement policy. And the complicating factor in the middle, certainly for larger businesses, of course, is you've got businesses, you might have a central HQ somewhere, but you'll be deploying on centres all over the shop. And so it's really, you start having to define local. So how does that ESG, environment, social and governance factor, overlay effectively the procurement, where you're dealing with businesses who may be buying, they may be making decisions based in a head office in Bristol, let's say, but actually the project may be running in Sheffield, and they've got contractors all over the shops, and they've got to relay a ESG policy onto the procurement policy, which up to this date has just been looking hard and sharp at price and against specification. So how does that overlay happen? Sorry, I'll need to cue it as well, won't I? Sarah, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, I'm just trying to follow the train of thought.
Sorry.
No, it's fine, it's me. I think the thing with ESG is that ESG fundamentally doesn't have any kind of legitimate legislation around it. You can, with ESG measuring, it's still one of those things where you can kind of say whatever you want to say. You can skew figures, you can measure things in, particular ways to create an outcome that you want. So ESG is important because it helps a business focus, hopefully, on what are they doing in terms of the governance of their own organisation and then the environmental and the social. But if you really want to have credibility, then the social value legislation, which is of course the S part, but it comes into all of ESG, is the bit to focus on.
Yeah,
because you can drive real change through it, and the idea of it, which at the moment it's still being implemented and understood. It's only 2 years old, so it's being implemented and understood by local authorities, by public sector organisations, you know, as to how they understand it in the procurement process.
Yeah.
So as they get more mature, they will leverage it better. So at the moment, you've got organisations who are more mature at understanding it, who've been measuring it for years, who are able to, you know, write into bids things that are perhaps more than they're being asked for.
And of course, this is a differential now between local government and national government, because local government, defining local procurement is probably not too complicated, because you're sitting in a local government environment and you'd have to work quite hard to not know what your local environment is. National government is deploying everywhere. So, but even then, you know, they're legislatively obliged, statutorily obliged to play that game. I think you expand it again to the private sector, and you're creating a whole new strand of complication by saying, well, hang on a minute, it matters where your project is rolling out, not just as simple as the fact you're running it from Bristol or wherever you are. Mike, your shout.
Yeah, so I think there's a whole level playing field thing here, which I think is what, you know, part of what Sarah was alluding to as well, in that, you know, a lot of the procurement, what I would class personally as bad procurement decisions I've seen before, is because only part of the equation was being looked at. So, you know, you're never going to negate the pricing element, because that's what makes a business run. That's what every business is being run for, is to make a profit, to reinvest and keep that business going. But you have to add the other factors in a better way. You know, again, as Sarah rightly said, you know, we've got the carbon footprint thing much better understood and being utilised now. We haven't got the whole CSG there yet, and it needs to be, you know, in making it a level playing field, we need to think from a personal perspective. You know, there's a reason why almost all of us get all our shopping from the local supermarket instead of going to the butcher, the baker and the candlestick maker. And if we can start readdressing the balance and making it an easier decision to do the right thing, which is, you know, where we can buy from those local suppliers, instead of letting someone else haul them all together to a central location, then bring them back out to us, kind of thing, then that whole dynamic changes. And I think that's the key to it. You know, it is a difficult question about what's legislated and how you do other things, but to me, there's a silver lining to every cloud. COVID pushed so many people in buying locally and appreciating, you know, the corner shop, the farm shop down the road, all that kind of stuff, how much value those things had, because they changed our lives. And certainly with the cost of fuel and transport, etc., going up, that whole transport it halfway around the world dynamic is definitely changing. So, you know, it's not a great thing for many of us, because, you know, the challenges on the cost of living, but the flip side of that is it is actually pushing people into making some, what you have to say, are better decisions, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, I've got a sort of one key question I'm going to put to you both at the end, but just to flag, I'm trying to get to a point where we can open up some questions at 2:35, just to allow us a bit of space. I know there's at least one question sitting in the chat box at the moment, but I think to sort of wrap up the formal side, to both of you separately, for businesses in this meeting, I know Sarah's got a very specific answer to this in a second, but for businesses in this meeting who are looking to get involved, whether it's about supporting an initiative or whether it's about getting involved in procurement themselves in a more ESG, social value orientated way, how would they go about doing that? Sarah, do you want to take that first?
So I would say read through the legislation and go on the Social Value UK website, and also the National TOMS website. So that's the Themes, Outcomes and Measures, and just familiarise yourself with what social value actually means, and put yourself in the shoes of the larger corporates, and what it means to them, because there is a really big opportunity for the SME community to leverage from the private sector if you understand the language that they're desperately seeking at the moment, because they have so many social value obligations to fulfill, and they don't all know how to do it. They really don't. It's so new, and they can't all afford teams of people. Now, the ones that can afford teams of people, such as who I work for, one of the ways that we demonstrate how we create social value is by upskilling the SME community in what social value is. So this, being part of this panel now and being able to sort of try and signpost people into the right direction is one way of doing it. But we also run workshops in local areas for SMEs to come and learn for free how to understand, navigating the social value landscape and how to measure their own impact, which we do for SMEs, but also for the BCSE community. So a lot of community organisations also need to demonstrate the impact they have, because it's important when they're bidding for grants and things like that. So, there's a massive opportunity where it's basically a corporate is sharing the wealth. They're sharing the resource that they're lucky to have, and that they are, understanding that, the tide rises all ships. Isn't that the saying? Something like that?
Yeah.
It's no point. Social value is completely meaningless if it's kept tight to the chest and used as a differential marketing tool.
And you have a specific thing going on in North Somerset. Go on quickly, date and time check it for us.
Yes, I haven't got a date and time because it's just been moved. But I am very happy for everybody on this to be emailed once we've got the new date and time. It's called a Meet the Buyer event. So specifically, people who are part of the built environment come for the Meet the Buyer bit. But we've also decided to start incorporating social value workshops into all our Meet the Buyer events. So therefore, even if you don't think you'd be a supplier for F&G, but you want to be a supplier for somebody else, who has to jump through the same sort of hoops that we do.
Brilliant.
We can teach you how to leverage better from the big guys.
We will circulate some notes afterwards. And just very, very quickly, Mike, 'cause I'm trying to get a few questions. They're coming in the chat box. But Mike, what's your take? How do people get involved?
So myself, Jill, also on the call, Adam, are actually involved in something called the Together Gloucestershire project, which is kind of recognising the challenge and wanting to do something about it in the county. And one of the big things we found out is a lot of the big guys don't realise who's actually kind of next door, around the corner from them. So we're working a couple of groups, one with the big guys, one with the small guys, and trying to work out how we bring everyone together, get the communication going. So anyone that wants to be a part of that, please, give us a
email
shout.
Mike. Email Mike. There you go. We'll be circulating contacts afterwards and things. But that would be good. So listen, we've got three questions that I've spotted in the box. Melina, do you want to just dive in with your question first? Is Melina with us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought it would be. Oh, hello. Can you hear me? Sorry, I wasn't.
We can.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't got my headphones in or anything, and I can't get my video going. But, anyway. Yes, I'm interested in. Oh, there I am. I'm interested in what the panelists might see the role of local currencies might be. It's a system that was started in the 80s called LET. The abbreviation is LETS. I think it's Local Exchange Trading System, I think it stands for. But I know one example in the UK is the Bristol pound. Basically, it's like an alternate currency, but it's traded just between, it could be between individuals, it could be even somebody who's got a skill who can offer it to their neighbours. And rather than just an exchange, there's actually a currency. So they can then use that currency to maybe get somebody else to do something for them. But it could also, businesses can also get involved, especially small businesses.
So keeping this as tight as we can, because we're trying to be wrapped in a minute or two, and we've got a couple more questions yet. Who wants to take that one?
I can.
Go on, Mike.
Yeah, I can see hesitation from Sarah. Like I said, I think legislation is a really challenging thing to do, and metrics drive behaviours. So, for example, if a business is getting income in a certain amount of a local currency, they therefore have to pass that on in the local currency. I think that's a very interesting thing and should be, and I'm familiar with the Bristol project, it would be good to experiment that a bit more widely. If you give a procurement department a metric of 10% of their spend or 20% or whatever has to be in that local currency, so they can only trade with people in it. I think it'd be interesting to see where that would go.
Interesting question. Interesting question.
Really good question.
But also the activist in me is very supportive of it, and I have a Bristol pound account, and actually it's that, you know, the situation that we're in right now as a nation, and where we're going to be at the end of this decade, anything that helps keep things in a local area. So, you know, we need to have more community organisations. We need to have more, like, currency, as you say, being spent within a local area to keep the money flowing somewhere instead of it being siphoned off. We need more community energy companies. We need more community farms. You know, it's
Brilliant.
It's all part of that.
Very, just Jane Balin's got a question, which I'm just going to read out very quickly. Do you think there's a conflict between globalization of employment and IT and the localization of procurement? Okay, 1 or 2 sentences each. Far away. Sarah, go on, you go first.
Well, I'm not sure that's my specialist subject.
No,
sorry.
feel free to defer. Mike,
I don't want to fudge an answer. Yeah,
that's
Mike.
okay. Mike, go on.
So all the best things have conflict in them. And for me, it's about getting the right balance. I've seen it going too far one way. I think it's about each company sector working out what a good balance is for them, because globalization is good. It makes the world smaller. Similarly, if you do too much of it, you put yourself at risk, and we're proving that right now as a country. So
Brilliant. And Paul Croker, you've got so I'm just reading opposition. Oh, that wasn't actually a question, sorry, unless you have got a question, Paul, but yeah, okay, that's fine. So Jill Smith, it's just, we're going to one more quick question from Jill. If you live close to the county border, what's your local? How do you define local? Who wants to take that one? Oh.
go on, I will.
Go on, then. Go on, then.
No, go on, Sarah, you've got it. Go on.
No, I'm not. I'm actually looking at Paul's and thinking that was a question.
Oh, sorry, it's me trying to do too many things at once. One line answer, and we'll go back to Paul's. Go on, Mike.
Go on, Mike, because I've forgotten what that question was now. Oh, I can see it now. Yes, close to a county border. Sorry, got it.
Yes, so you know, that possibly sparked by me talking about it together at Gloucestershire, but I think it's what's local to you. That what's important. If I asked Sarah about her business and other businesses that she, you know, what is local? Is it 5 miles? Is it 10 miles? Is it 30 miles? Is it 50 miles? Is it, yeah, it's what it means to you. So I think county borders and other things are irrelevant, I think, for each business and sector.
And it's an ongoing dialogue at the moment in Together Gloucestershire. It's a good question. Okay, very quickly back to Paul. We are over time. Paul, Paul's asking how SMEs get onto these networks and frameworks. Very quickly, 1 sentence answers.
Contact me.
Contact Mike. Sarah?
I also think going on the Social Value UK website, they have huge amounts of free resources that, you know, they're designed, they're an independent organisation. So they have loads of resources to help you navigate, for example, what social value is. And that gives you, you know, the routes in to what you make it in your local area or your business sector.
Brilliant. I want to thank you both so much and for all the questions, and apologise, grovel to Guy for overrunning. Guy, back to you.
No, it's absolutely fine. It was absolutely fascinating, and there are really great local examples of how these work. To me, and in fact to Jill, just beyond Bridgewater, you've got Hinkley C, and the supply chain management and procurement processes that have been put in place for about the last 5 or 6 years from everyone from Somerset Chamber right the way through. They're making a great deal of difference to a lot of local small businesses rather than bringing big businesses in from all over the place. So I think it's absolutely.
Okay, so I'm just about to put you into breakout rooms, and what I would like you to discuss in your breakout room is share with the others in the room the best piece of advice you've had around running or growing your business since you started. And then what difference did it make and why? And you'll have about 3 minutes each because we need to be back about 3:10.